look at how social protection information systems interact with identification systems. And thanks for your interest and for joining. As you can see, you will get a notification. We would like to record this event. So by staying online, you consent to us making a recording of the webinar. On today's agenda, we'll today have a presentation from Estonia on their experience with integrating social protection management information systems with ID systems, followed by discussants or lightning talks from various country perspectives, international organizations and solution providers. And then you will also have an opportunity to come in with some of your questions for the discussion before we conclude. But before we go into the presentation of Estonia, we would like to give you a quick introduction of who we, the organizers, are. So this workshop series is organized by the Digital Convergence Initiative, which is a joint effort under the Universal Social Protection Partnership to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. That is, and in this Digital Convergence Initiative, you have both members of USP 2030, but also non-members from governments, development partners, and the private sector. The focus of the Digital Convergence Initiative is very much on building consensus-based standards for interoperability. And we think this is really important for developing an environment for innovation for IC information and communication technology solution providers, so that we are still flexible in the use of digital products that we use in the administration of our social protection systems, and we avoid vendor lock-in if we can ensure that systems are interoperable. This reduces times and costs and allows for a greater diversity of solutions that can be more easily mixed and matched. Please, the next slide. So this, as I said before, it's a workshop series, Interoperability in Action, that demonstrates the interoperability between social protection management, information systems, and other systems, both within the social protection system environment, but also the public sector at large. So far, we organized a series of deep dives into showing the interface between two specific elements, sharing an understanding of process workflows, data elements, technical APIs that are required for interoperability and how they really worked in practice in different countries, thereby creating awareness on the benefits of interoperability through these use cases, and demonstrate how the interoperability using digital public goods can be used, and hearing from stakeholders and experts discussing also critically these experiences or how to move forward. Next slide, please. So the past two workshops, we've looked at social protection information systems interacting with civil registration and vital statistics systems during the first workshop, and the second workshop focused on payment systems. The recording of these two workshops are available online on our website in case you would like to watch past recordings of those two workshops. And today our focus is on identification systems. Next slide, please. So the Digital Convergence Initiative is led by a steering committee composed of the International Labour Organization, the World Bank, and the GIZ. My name is Veronika Wozak. I'm Social Protection Policy Specialist at the International Labour Organization, and we'll hear from World Bank and GIZ colleagues later on. Next slide, please. So this provides an overview of some of the elements that need to be interoperable and interact within social protection systems delivery. And I think if you click, you'll see. So these are the three that we focused on for these interoperability and practice workshops, and today's focus is on the ID platforms. Next, and I guess with this I hand over to Anita, who's the Senior Advisor of the Digital Convergence Initiative from GIZ. Please, Anita.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks so much for the introduction and setting the context. I had the colleague from CTO from Estonia say that it will be difficult for him to join, but Christo, have you been able to join? Do we have Christo from Estonia join now?
No, it doesn't look like he's on the call,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, so thanks. I think so. Probably move ahead. Lena, can I take control of the slides? I'll share my screen. Yeah. Everybody can see the screen?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. So we'll bring in Christo whenever he is able to join. So this is to, set the context of the whole presentation of this workshop where we are trying to see how an ID system contributes to social protection program delivery, understand the business processes, how it contributes, and then subsequently we will show you some action with how systems are actually interacting with digital public goods, most safe open CRVS and Mojo Loop deployed in our sandbox with a sample SP system. So we see that ID system contributes to SP delivery in essentially 4 ways. First, 2 parts I see ID system is in action, which is active, wherein ID system participates in providing service to an SP's MIS system. So the first way is it helps in answering the question, who are you? So if I want to establish who am I? I'm Anita Mittal, who can assertively and authoritatively give confidence to the social protection system. Yes, this is Anita Mittal. That is an ID system. So this we call as identification. With the consent of the user, the ID system is able to establish my identity that this is Anita Mittal or Maria Gond with date of birth and address. The second mechanism in which ID system is in action is once the ISP system knows this is Maria, can she again establish her identity to say that I am Maria and the ID system says yes or no. If she is able to prove her identity using some authentication factor, which could be a biometric or a PIN or a password or a one-time password on the mobile. So this is the second mechanism by which an SP system is leveraging an ID system to establish the identity of a person who has already become a applicant in the system. Now we will look at 2 scenarios where ID system is not interacting directly with the SP system, but is a passive contributor through the unique ID number. So if Maria Gond registers with her ID number 12345, second time again she wants to register herself. Then if she registers, then the ID number, if it matches, the system will know it's a duplicate. And this is a basic property of IT systems database where you can say if any number is repeated, it's a duplicate. So it's a easy thing for an IT system to detect duplicates if the numbers match. So we will not have any duplicate registrations or beneficiaries in a program by checking the unique ID number, which has a very high level of assurance to the deduplication that happens in issuance of the number. And the last scenario that I'm showing today is the interoperability, right? So if I know this 12345 Maria is in system CRVS, how do I get her attributes and only her attributes from the tax system? By linking based on the identifier. Similarly, if I want to get it from a social registry, is Maria poor? I can check her attribute from the social registry using the ID number as a linking number. As we all know, lots of people have the same name. Maria definitely is a very common name. Date of birth also could match, especially in countries like India or China or Ethiopia, where there are 100 million people and names do match. So this unique identifier helps us to uniquely link records and establish eligibility criteria for SPMI system, which you will see in the subsequent slides. So let's see how these features contribute to the various stages in the SP delivery chain. So this is a very famous delivery chain, which we all have been seeing, which is from the World Bank. And there are various stages through which a applicant goes through to become a beneficiary and get services through the various stages of the delivery chain. And through our analysis, and it's a well-known fact too, that the ID system contributes to every stage of this whole delivery chain. And in the subsequent slides, I will just show you at a high level through the assess, enroll, provide, and manage stages, how the different roles that we discussed of authentication, identification, deduplication, and interoperability are being demonstrated in the use cases. So let's take the first stage, assess. And here I'm showing the process of registration where Maria comes with her credential, which could be a digitally signed card with a QR code, or it could be on her mobile. There is no internet connectivity. So she comes, shows this card or shows her mobile, and the officer is able to scan the QR code, capture the details which are there in the QR code. And since it is digitally signed, the officer can establish that this identity is genuine, matches the photo on the card or the mobile with the person in front, and then registers Maria in the system. Because of the ID number, they can also do a deduplication check and know that this is not a duplicate record. Moving on, I show the whole same scenario with online authentication, identification, and deduplication. Now Maria comes, she need not even have her card. If she remembers her number and her credentials, authentication factor, which could, can you mute him, please? With the OTP or a PIN or a password, she will be able to give her identifier, her credential, and this authentication request along with KYC request. So you're authenticating her for consent. So if you establish it is Maria who is asking the KYC details, the ID system will share the response. In this case, OTP is being shared by Maria. And once you establish that this is Maria who wants her data to be shared, the ID system shares the eKYC details with the SPMI system. The SPMI system, social protection system, checks if Maria already exists in the system. If the answer is no, then she is successfully registered and notified of her registration in the program. Moving on, we show the power of interoperability for doing eligibility check. So we saw that so far Maria only gave her identifier and her credential, and she successfully registered. She doesn't need to do anything if you leverage the power of interoperability. So at this point, for getting her enrolled or making her a beneficiary of this scheme, we need to check her age because this is a old age allowance scheme. Check her age and her gender, income level, whether she is poor, check her poverty status, is she among the extreme poor, and check that she is not already a beneficiary of a old age widow allowance scheme because you cannot be member of both the schemes. So let's see this in action. So the SP system, social protection system, sends the ID number and it can send some attributes for validation with the CRVS or request for attributes like name, age. So once this data is fetched and you determine, yes, she is old, then you request her tax status. Is she paying, she in a high income tax bracket, or she is not paying tax, or she's very poor. Subsequently, you go to the social registry to see if she's in the qualifying the criteria of extreme poor or very poor. If she does, then you check, is she a member of another program which doesn't allow her to become a member of this. So once you get all these attributes, this decision of whether Maria can be a beneficiary or not takes less than a minute. It happens in seconds, all this interoperability through the back-end business rules. And at the time of registration itself, Maria can get a decision whether you're enrolled in the program or not. Now that Maria is successfully enrolled, she would like to receive her benefits So for the receiving the cash payments, she can use her existing bank account and just link it with her ID number. And this is possible through the feature of ID Mapper, which we will demonstrate in our in-action content demonstration use case. So when she gives her ID number for linking, we need to establish that, yes, this is Maria who is linking her bank account. So you go to the ID system, establish her identity through authentication. And if it is Maria, then you save her bank account details with the ID number in the ID mapper of the payment system. With this, Maria is able to receive her benefits when the SPMIS system sends that pay this amount X to this ID number for this particular program. So the social protection system doesn't need to know what is her account details, which is the bank where she's getting, just the ID number. With the help of ID mapper is able to send the payment instruction to the relevant bank. So tomorrow, if Maria decides that bank A is a good provider, she can move to bank B, and the social protection system doesn't have to change a bit in its own process. The only change that happens is at the ID mapper level. So this makes it loosely coupled system, which is a good practice. So moving on, let's see how ID plays a role in enabling Maria to get the benefits which are sitting in her bank account. So she doesn't have to really even go to the bank. She can just go to a shop nearby or to a banking correspondent or a banking agent which visits her village every Thursday. So when the agent comes, she establishes her identity using her ID and a credential and says that I want to withdraw 500 Indian rupees from my account. So when she makes this request, the bank payment system sends the authentication request to the ID system, and on successful authentication, requests the bank to debit her account of the amount she has requested, and that amount is transmitted into the agent's account, and the agent then hands over the cash to Maria. So you see, so far Maria has used nothing else except her ID number and her credential to get all the services. So it's not only cash where Maria can use her ID, she can also use it for in-kind services. And a good example of this is the grain ATM, which is operational in India and linked to the national ID system Aadhaar. So you go to the ATM, grain ATM, authenticate yourself, giving your ID number and your biometric, and you say, I want 5 kgs of rice. So once that authentication response comes, the public distribution system checks whether Maria is still entitled to take 5 kilograms of rice from her benefit quota. And if yes, then the system tells Maria to place the bag under the machine and the grain starts filling in her bag. And the system does update that Maria has been disbursed 3 kgs, 4 kgs, whatever she was disbursed if the grain ATM runs out of the quantity of grain, or if it's 5 kgs, then that is updated in the system for subsequent withdrawal. And the last step, where we see how ID system works in the delivery chain, is the manage step. Here, I'm quickly rushing through how Maria does an authentication, because we all know once she authenticates to the SP portal, now she has access to the portal wherein she can either update any of her data attributes, lodge a complaint, or check status of any payment or service which she had requested. So with this, I think the theory part is over. Now we will demonstrate some of the business processes and the role of ID that we have seen in the subsequent slides and system demonstration by our team who is partnering with DCI to do all this implementation work from Access Health. So now I invite Parth to explain the demonstration setup. Parth, over to you.
Hi everyone. As a next step, our team will demonstrate the interoperability in action. So for this demonstration, we have created a simulated environment by mimicking a digital ecosystem. To give you a better idea, we have a pictorial representation of this sandbox environment, in which on the left hand side, we have a sample demo app for old age allowance scheme, which we will have built in-house. And on the right hand side, we have installed and are using three digital public good systems: Mozip as the ID system, the Open CRVS as the civil registry, and the Moja Loop as the payment switch. These three digital systems interact with the old age allowance scheme via interoperability, which is facilitated by various services like gateway and adapters available as the digital public good. Now, we will walk you through how, using this interoperability, the old age allowance system sends the ID number to the ID system and receives the eKYC details for registration, sends the ID number to CRVS system and receives details for eligibility check, and similarly sends the ID number to the payment system and receives the bank account status. For this, I invite Rajdeep and Shefali to provide you this demonstration for our setup on the sandbox environment. Over to you, Shefali.
Yeah, thanks, Parth. Hi, everyone. So Rajdeep, can you share your screen, please? We will now demonstrate the interoperability among Social Protection Program, ID system, CRVS, and payment systems. Maria Gon, a senior citizen who is extremely underprivileged, wants to apply for the Old Age Allowance Program, which offers financial support to any other citizen in need. To apply for the benefit, she goes to the website for the Old Age Allowance Program. The site is linked to the national ID system and allows users to identify themselves using their national ID. Maria inputs her national ID and clicks Generate OTP to obtain the one-time password. Maria receives the password through email. We have used email for demonstration reasons. Also, it can be accessed via mobile device. She enters the OTP. Maria is asked for permission to share the data from the national ID system that the program needs. The data attributes requested are her full name, date of birth, and gender. She provides consent and validates OTP. After she is successfully authenticated, the data sent by the ID system is pre-filled in the registration form. Maria provides additional details like her contact number, and her address. Maria also provides her consent to check the status of payment account using her ID number. She clicks apply and successfully completes the registration. Maria has finished her job here. However, we still need to check Maria's eligibility and whether she has linked a bank account to her national ID. Now we will show you how that will happen behind the scenes by using the screens to illustrate this background registration procedure. While the processing would happen in the backend of this application, we want to demonstrate here the interoperability in action in the backend. We can see that the system has already queued up Maria. To check her eligibility, the system needs to verify her age and whether she is still alive. To do this, the SP system sends a request to the CRVS system to fetch the necessary attributes for Maria. Since Maria meets both the requirements, the process flows advances to the next step, which is to check if she has a valid bank account linked to her ID. To accomplish this, the SP system is utilizing the ID mapper of the payment system, which links the ID number to the bank account. Since Maria's bank account is linked, she has been successfully enrolled in the old age allowance scheme and has been notified accordingly. Let's now take a look at the payment processing. For the purpose of this demo, we will initiate the payment manually. However, in reality, this is typically an automated process as per the payment cycle. First, let's take a look at the Maria's bank account. Currently, she only has 100 rupees in her account. Now, the payment has been initiated. And Maria has received both the money and a notification on her phone. She now has 5,600 rupees in her bank account. The system has logged the payment reconciliation in a report, and it can be tracked using a unique code and a transaction ID. We will now display the logs of the various interoperability interactions. We can see in our first log the timestamp, which is just 4 minutes old, that a request for the OTP generation was submitted by the ID systems, which in our setup is MOSIP. When the OTP is successfully validated, Maria's data is sent back in an encrypted form via MOSIP's AKYC APIs and is further decrypted using the system's private key. The second log we are showing you is that using Maria's national ID, her data, that is her first name, last name, and the date of birth, is getting fetched by the SP system from the Open CRVS. Now we move to the third log, which shows that via Maria's national ID, her validation of account is successful, is payable true, and using her national ID, the disbursement request and response data is fetched by the SP system from the payment system, that is the Moja Loop system which we are using. This brings us to the end of the demonstration. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we are happy to answer them at the end of the workshop. Now, I would hand it over to Anita. Over to you, Anita.
Thanks, Shefali. Yeah, so now we have seen how we have seen the interoperability of three different interfaces with the social protection system, with the CRVS, with the ID system, as well as Mojo Loop. And what was working there was APIs. So we were using the APIs between the two systems to talk to each other. For the ID system, the authentication and the eKYC of MOSIP were used for the old age allowance scheme. Now there is another standard for the ID interaction, which is the Federation Protocol. And the two commonly used ones are the OpenID Connect and the SAML. MOSIP has also implemented this Federation Protocol of OpenID Connect, which we'll show to you in the demonstration. But before that, I would like to explain a little bit on what is the difference and the pros and cons of the two different standard mechanisms. So if you look at the application programming interface, Maria comes to the SPMIS system portal where she gives her ID number and she gives her credential here. She might give her fingerprint to the SP system or give her face image or even the OTP that she gets on a mobile, she provides it to the SP system or the password. Though encryption and happens for these, but the data does flow to the SP system. The SP system sends the packet to the ID system. The ID system validates the credential, the authentication factor, and gives a success or a failure response to the SPMIS system, based on which Maria is either allowed access or asked to retry again to establish her identity. Whereas if you look at the Federation Protocol, the process flow, technical process flow is different. When Maria requests service to the SPMIS, she will be asked to choose which ID system she would like to use to establish her identity. And whichever ID system she selects, she is redirected to that ID system. And the response of the authentication happens at the ID system, and the response is submitted by the ID system to SPMIS. Let me show this in animated workflow. So here I'm showing the example with multiple identity providers. So imagine that this social protection system service provider has entered into agreements with three identity providers. One of them could be national ID, second could be bank ID, third could be another mobile ID provider. So this says for inclusion, it says any user can use any of the identities to establish their identity. So when Maria goes and tries to log into this application, which is the SP system, the SP system gives her a choice of three ID systems, ID1, ID2, ID3. Maria selects ID1 provider. The minute she clicks the button ID1 here, her browser is redirected to the ID provider system. So she's no more on the service provider system. She's talking now to the ID provider system. Here, Maria chooses whatever credential she has set up with the ID provider system to establish her identity. It could be ID number and password, ID number and biometric, or ID number and a PIN or a one-time password. So once she provides her credentials, the ID system matches and verifies this credential with the authentication factor and then gives a response, whether it is successful or not. And this response it gives directly to the SP provider through the backend channel. It says Maria has been authenticated with one authentication factor or two authentication factors. So it says what is the level of assurance in the authentication mechanism. Once the service provider gets this response, the ID provider redirects Maria to the URL which the service provider has set up with the ID system. So Maria is redirected through the browser back to the service provider. So either it will say, welcome Maria, how can we help you? Or it will say, sorry, your authentication failed, can you retry? So to know more about how this federation works, you can look at this World Bank document on federated ecosystem, a practitioner's note on current approaches and lessons. The link is available here. So now we will do the action part. Whatever we did the theory, we'll be showing you in action how OpenID Connect protocol works, again with the MOSIP system. So for this, we just want to set the context. And for that, I will invite Lena to explain us the use case scenario. Lena?
Thanks, Anita. Okay, so let's think of a hypothetical use case. Mary is a small trader from Togo who works in the neighboring Benin. Every day she crosses the border to sell flowers in Benin. Today has been a good day. Mary's very happy as she has made a lot of money. However, thinking about crossing the border back home with all of this money, she gets a little worried. What might happen? Fortunately, she has an idea. She can simply open a bank account in Benin and deposit the money there. So let's go to the bank to see what happens there in a live demo.
Rajdeep, over to you. Can you share your screen?
Yes, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, thank you. Okay, the bank officer, Sarah, asks her to establish herself. Can you provide your Benin ID? Mary says, I only have my Togo ID. Is this acceptable as well? Sarah nods. Yes, that is no problem. I'll show you how it works. Mary comes over and takes a seat next to Sarah, looking over her shoulder at the screen as she explains. You want to use your Togo ID, so I select Sign up using Togo ID. And click on Go. As the two systems are interoperable, you are now directed to the ID portal of Togo. There's no need to get confused with the URL. As this is a demo setting, it still corresponds to MOSIP, but in a real-life scenario, this would belong to the Togo ID system. Mary, you can authenticate now with your ID number and your PIN. Okay. Now, please consent to share the attributes that you want us to access by selecting them and clicking on Allow. Great. Now we are redirected to the system of my bank here in Benin. Mary smiles and so does Sarah. As a resident of Togo, she enters her contact number. Enter address. And completes her application by clicking on Apply. Amazing, the registration has been successful. Sarah says, congratulations, Mary, we have opened your bank account. Mary deposits her money in the account. She feels relieved and happy. A happy Mary, without worries, can cross the border back home to Benin. And with that, I'm happy to give the floor back to Kumal to tell us a bit more about the standards that are crucial to make this interoperability possible. Kumal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lena. Hi, everyone. As you have seen in the last two demonstrations, the goal of interoperability is to allow different systems to seamlessly communicate and share information with each other. This requires the use of standardized processes, data elements, code directory, value sets, and API, which assure that systems can understand and interpret the information that is being exchanged. As part of DCI initiative, Anita, can you please share the slide? Just bring the slide, give me a minute. Okay. If you can confirm my slide is available, it's been seen?
Yes, it's seen.
So as part of the system interoperability, it is important for systems to interact and understand the language that is being operated. So as part of DCI, we are creating the interoperability in terms of standards, data processes, which will consist of data elements, its code directory, and value sets. Along with based on these data standards, we are also creating the API to showcase the interoperability among the systems in terms of request and response. Some of the APIs we are trying to showcase here is like generate OTP for beneficiary. This API generates the OTP based on the user ID being provided, as we have seen in the demonstration. And it also give a response as to what is the target source, target device where the OTP has been sent. Similarly, other APIs are designed, for example, OTP for validation, which validates the OTP based on the transaction ID and the individual ID that is provided and send the response back for the OTP authentication of the person. Other APIs that we are creating is like eKYC encrypted response, which indicates shows the encrypted response of the user, which was shown in the demonstration, that is being sent back to the requesting system based on, again, on the user ID, the authenticated ID, and as well as the transaction ID. And using the encrypted message that is received from the MOSIF, in this case, the decrypted APIs have been created to decrypt the values and send it back to the systems to further use for further usage in the registration. So similarly, there are multiple APIs that we are working on designing to encompass the multiple scenarios. I'm happy to discuss that, and this brings to mind. Thank you. Veronica, do we have Anita back?
Otherwise, I would invite Pramod to take the floor. Pramod, are you here?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so Anita dropped off, is it? Okay. So I need to share something. So thank you for having me. And I've been watching. It's wonderful to see the interoperability in action. Congratulations to the DCI team. I'll talk about how some of these have come together at scale in India and why interoperability was the essence of entire digital public infrastructure DPI journey. Let me share a deck. Please confirm if you are able to see.
Yes, we can see it.
And you can see, let me know when you are able to see it in full screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Also works.
So, okay, thank you. So I'm going to take probably about 10 minutes, 8 or 10 minutes to run through the essence of it. Just for the people who are uninitiated, India is very, very large, now the most populous nation on earth. 22 official languages, but the place I come from, Bangalore, for example, speaks 109 languages. So what you need to keep in mind is the diversity and scale. So India always had this challenge of diversity and scale playing together. But interestingly, from the mobile phone onwards, we have been quite people, when they see value, they seem to absorb very well. So cell phone revolution was amazing for Indians with 1 billion connection, 800 million internet users and so on. And before we started the project, identity project, that was the beginning of what we sort of call now India Stack, or as part of the Digital India initiative. India was only having 17% of bank account in 2008. And that means most of the people didn't have access to banking itself. But India was also spending large amount of subsidy. So that actually meant that lack of identity and lack of bank account meant was that a lot of cash transfer, physical cash transfer to people who are not really identified well. And that meant lots of diversion. So that was the biggest issue government was facing to deal with it. But if you fast forward today, this is a 2020 report from Bureau of International Settlements, the Central Bank from Basel. And they studied our India's development curve, the GDP curve. And they said India, without the underlying identity block and payment switch and everything else coming in play, we would have taken 46 years to provide 80% of the people bank account. That's what it says. It takes 4.5 decades roughly to give more than 80% banking penetration. But what happened though in India was that India achieved this in just 6 years. So India, you will see a non-linear or exponential uh, transformation that is happening. That exponential nature of that transformation was very, very intriguing for most people. Why it happened so fast, compressing 4 decades. And also 2020 during the COVID time, and Anita and the demonstration was showing how direct benefits transfer can be done. Social protection schemes can be ID linked, bank linked with an ID mapper. It can be quite seamless. And that's exactly what India did. India today has about 1,000 plus schemes or social protection schemes that are converted to what's called direct benefits transfer into the bank accounts of the beneficiary. And in the ID mapper, which Anita was talking about earlier, India's ID mapper contains 860 million unique people who have mapped their identity to their financial address. It can be a bank account or a wallet. So that's what it typically happens. Most of the people in India today use banks because bank account is accessible to them, as I said earlier. And the savings are enormous, and India has transferred 322 billion so far directly to beneficiaries in the last, several years, forward, mostly 7, 8 years maybe. And the savings just in federal scheme itself is 27 billion. So ROI, return of investment on putting an ID system and putting a general purpose ID mapper and a payment switch and creating what's called a sort of government to person payment infrastructure, the ROI is unbelievably high. But it needs to be well thought out. It needs to be thought out in terms of digital public infrastructure that is not custom built for schemes. It has to be what we call a slightly more generalized infrastructure, which is the reason why India also managed to transfer during COVID pandemic using the same rails. We were able to also transfer money during the first lockdown and a little bit in the second lockdown. This goes back to the underlying building blocks. How do you build these building blocks in an interoperable fashion? And interoperability is the essence of this building block. Otherwise, building blocks can't be connected together. And when they cannot be connected together, you end up creating massive silos. And that does not give you, sort of non-linear or exponential transformation at all. And it started with identity. And very interestingly, the identity project Aadhaar currently covers 1.35 billion people. It had very early on, we focused on interoperability as an argument. And because identity system was not solving anything particularly, it had to be embedded and leveraged by many other systems such as social protection systems, banking system, insurance sector and healthcare sector and so on. As they incorporate identity into them, the only way they can incorporate is through identity, interoperability design. Because if these are not blocks that can be connected and combined, and then we have a problem, right? So this is why today Aadhaar does 1.5 billion authentications every month on that system and continues to be used by many, many systems, public, private system, not just government, private systems, regulated systems, banking industry, financial industry, health industry, all start using identities in various purposes. But India is not stopping there. I think this is where the federated identities and federated identity a protocol like OpenID, Anita talked about this matters, because no country should have just one IT system. And while you can have foundational identity, you will end up having functional identities as well, like a doctor identities and so on. And that's what, and company identities, identity for things. India is doing lots of that through open APIs and registries in a very, very similar manner for vehicles and companies. medical professional identities and so on. So we are doing this beyond the foundational identity, which is Aadhaar. And then, of course, we went on build payment, and payment was all about interoperability. Again, cannot stress how important interoperable payment protocol. It was not about launching a mobile app. It was not about launching an internet banking portal. It was about defining what that protocol ought to be, interoperable protocol, so that the ecosystem, banking ecosystem, mobile wallet ecosystem, fintech ecosystem, all can come together to create innovation on top of that interoperability layer. Because interoperability has to be defined, very well defined. Once your rail is laid, then people can innovate. That's exactly what happened in India, right? We have 380 banks, 66 different apps at least, 22 available in 22 different languages, 50 million merchants, not done by one bank or one fintech company, many, but they're all interoperable. I can use any app to pay, any app, any merchant from any bank to any bank, any merchant to any other system and so on. It's highly interoperable. But even beyond, what interoperability also did is the inclusion, which is very interesting. The same interoperable protocol is used for people with smartphone, and same is used by people with feature phone using IVR and dial-in, and even by people with no phone, which was the demo you saw in a simulated demo that Anita and team was showing, is using fingerprint as an authentication credential, or as a OTP. For feature phone you can use OTP, smartphone you can use full-fledged app, but people who have no phones can also use their face or fingerprint as a mechanism to actually authenticate and transfer. And last month, we launched this in 2016, and last month we did 8 billion transactions. And then we went on to build data and credentialing. Just identity and payment is not enough. You want to make sure individuals are empowered and SMEs are empowered with their own data and credentials. And that was again an interoperability play. It was not an application building or a solution building play. We built DigiLocker as a solution, reference solution, and then we subsequently built what's called a DEPA, Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture, which is a completely on an interoperable open source protocol that allows individuals to consent to any data provider to directly end-to-end encrypted data transfer to any data consumer. The power of this comes in lending, applying for scholarships or applying for jobs, where I am able to share my data and my credential, my degree certificate and my skill certificate and other credentials in a consented fashion, in an end-to-end encrypted fashion, very secure fashion, directly to the people who need it. And this is extremely powerful because data becomes no more an oil to be extracted. India is moving data to become an asset for 1 billion people to leverage. And that's what's happening in India today. You can watch, and I have some URLs here. We'll share the deck later. But interestingly, India is really pushing the boundary. India is creating a most interoperable, decentralized, open commerce networks where transactions can happen. For example, a farmer can discover a market and sell in the market, discover price, or a buyer can discover a farmer who is producing, or a taxi driver can discover a consumer, or a homestay, a small SME homestay can actually be discovered by individuals. So it's very powerful reimagination. But the entire construct of this open network is powered by a set of interoperable protocols. It's it's amazing that it's not a solution play, it's not an application build, mobile app play, it's not a portal play, it's purely an interoperability protocol play, on top of which the entire ecosystem is innovating, government ecosystem, market ecosystem, and so on. So when you bring it together, it's very interesting to watch how interoperability play becomes the pivot for what we call a exponential or a non-linear transformation. And if government did everything, this is what the view is going to be. Government provided banks, government provided apps, government provided portals, government provided solutions. You will end up becoming a single provider, sort of slow innovation model. But on the other hand, if you outsource everything to private, Then you go to the other extreme, where you create walled gardens, lock-ins, monopolies, and you create lack of interoperability and lack of competition, which is even larger problem for digital economy. You don't get a fair competition. So how do you play this middle ground, where digital public infrastructure, governments and regulators, if you are listening to it, you should be focusing on the green box, defining what is that underlying interoperable rails look like. Identities, registries, ownership of assets, sharing protocol, transaction protocol, payment protocols, and so on. Once you define that, you have to let, while government can build reference applications, you ought to allow innovations by the market players on top of that. If you can get these two balanced view, open rails like a highway and a private innovation, you have a good balance of a fair competition, choice to the people, addressing diversity of solutioning and continuous innovation, because the market will compete with market to create innovation and competition, while still ensuring portability and interoperability as a regulator, because to stop monopolies from forming. It's a very, very interesting way to address interoperability, and that's what everything we did for. Everything we did so far plays on that one pivot called interoperability. Very, very powerful. And I'm glad DCI has set up this conversation on interoperability today, because the essence of DPI is that underlying interoperable rails to be built. Thank you.
Thanks, Pramod. Thank you so much for the discussion. I think we'll have a few questions for you. I see one or two dropping in already. We'll bring you back after the other presenters. So with this, I'll probably invite Chris from World Bank to share his views on this topic. Are you sharing your screen, Chris?
I'm attempting to.
Okay.
Could you all tell me if you can see the slides, please?
We can see, but it's not very clear. This is it's not full screen. Can you go in slideshow mode?
I'm in slideshow mode, so that's.
You can stop sharing. I'll share. Probably that'll help.
Okay, I'll do it that way. Thank you. So while Anita is trying to pull up the slides, and thank you for helping me out with technical issues, it's great to be going after Pramod because he's such an engaging and inciting speaker and so forward-thinking about these issues around digital public infrastructure and interoperability that are really, really high on the World Bank's agenda. So what I'd like to spend just a couple minutes talking about. What I'd like to spend just a couple minutes talking about is how increasingly at the World Bank, and I work for the ID4D group, the Identification for Development group. So we've been, at the forefront, certainly within the bank and also globally, on some good practice thinking around ID systems, foundational and functional for a number of years now. But increasingly, we're seeing identity is part of a broader digital public infrastructure that cuts across the economy, cuts across the government, like Pramod was talking about. And we see it as a way to situate identity and social registries and social protection and also different sectoral systems within a broader infrastructure that really unlocks development outcomes across the entire society. And common standards and interoperability are really the basis. That ends up being the difference between a bunch of great technology and a cohesive digital public infrastructure. So, what do we mean by digital public infrastructure? Well, there's three words. So it's digital. So that's clear enough. But you'll notice that the photo I've chosen is of a bridge from 120 years ago. And the idea here is that we're moving into a digital world. But infrastructure is infrastructure. It's the things we share, it's the rails, it's the bridges. And now in the digital world, there's an analog. So now instead of rails and bridges, we're going to have platforms, we're going to have protocols, we're going to have standards. But fundamentally, they're all for the public benefit. They're shared investments that different sectors, different programs can capitalize on to improve development outcomes, to improve service quality. And so, it's not necessarily technology or a box. It's not necessarily provided by the public sector. You could have a hard kind of digital public infrastructure, like a digital ID database, some sort of traditional boxes and lines infrastructure, but it could also be something soft. It could be a regulation, a standard, a data model, something very light touch, something to just align actors to work together. Similarly, it could be something provided by the public sector, like a data sharing platform for government or something like that. But it could just as easily be something provided by the private sector. Some examples that have been around for a very long time are things like payment switches for interoperability between banks and mobile money providers. And there's also equivalents moving forward, like Pramod was mentioning, around consent and other functionalities. And so on the next slide, kind of what I want to get at here is that digital public infrastructure, for some of us, it'll be a new term. It's a term that's been picked up globally in the last couple of years. I think the Indian experience has been a big part of that, but it's also been discussed at the UN General Assembly, at the G20, at the G7, and there's a lot of alignment around it, which I'll get to later. But fundamentally, what is it? It's just existing agendas, but promoting interoperability between them. Whereas we used to have identity by itself and payments by themselves, and now we're thinking about linking those up through data exchange and interoperability, not only within the financial sector for payments or federation to have interoperability between identity systems, but then also pushing for a broader interoperability at the society level and getting the trust there. So at the World Bank, we'll have on the right column, on identity for 6 or 7 years now, the Identification for Development Initiative has been working on that. On payments, our sister initiative is G2PX, working on promoting better quality G2P payments. The Digital Development Global Practice has been very active in data exchange and in trust. So we'll see those come up on the right. And so when we think of this digital in terms of digital public infrastructure, it's really just a recognition that if we take all these things we're already doing and thinking about, in the case of social protection, social MIS, G2P, open G2P payments, and we take that up a strategic level, we think about interoperability in a broad way, we start unlocking some really, really interesting society level outcomes. And then, even in the COVID pandemic or in some of the more recent crises, we've seen that countries that have this digital public infrastructure in place have been able to scale. For example, in a recent study by our G2PX initiative, we found that globally during the pandemic and the various crises, is that countries that had existing databases and digital databases and beneficiary databases and data exchange platforms in place were able to cover 51% of their populations with some sort of social assistance or cash transfers. But countries that weren't able to rely on a DPI they already had were only reaching about 16%. And this analysis controlled for factors like income. And it just shows that in making these investments in the DPI of a country, whether it's furnished by public sector, private sector, and linking the different sectors together, so being able to draw on data from education or tax in the social protection, social assistance eligibility, and it really makes a difference for scalability. So on the next slide, I'll just briefly indicate, some of the ways that this can all come together. Sometimes we hear about digital stacks. So you've got, your different sectoral use cases. We've kind of schematized health and agriculture and what have you up at the top. But I'll just, whoever's controlling the slides, if you can just have the bottom come in progressively. So, payments, it's great to be able to digitalize social payments. ID, it's great to be able to expand access to digital payments, control fraud, have a unique list of beneficiaries. Trust, as Pramod was saying, it's great to be able to collect consent, so that when we share data or when we enroll someone, that we know that they've consented to it. On data exchange, it's great to be able to link all this together, but it's when you really bring all of it together and you take it up that additional strategic level and you have interoperability at a national level that you get the really interesting benefits, like being able to not only use your digital ID to withdraw a payment, but why not also use your digital ID to give consent, in order to have personal data shared on your behalf from other official sources, such as a tax registry or from an existing bank that you have an account at, that might allow you to open a new account, or might allow you to access a service, or it might allow you to prove your eligibility for social assistance and get access to that sort of aid from the government, all while protecting your privacy, and respecting your consent in a very robust, digitally verifiable way. And those sorts of use cases where it's really holistic and it really maximizes the quality of the service while also maximizing the protection of the person and their data that you get when you have interoperability, not just between two building blocks, but you really take it up the next level. And so, when we're thinking about putting into place that operability, it's important to have interoperability on a narrow technological level, define APIs and figure out what technology you're going to use to share data, think about architectures like distributed verifiable credentials, these sorts of things that are emerging. But the non-technology stuff is just as important and probably harder to implement. So that includes things like agreeing on common standards for data, common data models, the semantic interoperability, cybersecurity systems that are going to complement the interoperability. Because if you're just sharing data on behalf of people without having some sort of monitoring in place to make sure that it's not being compromised or the privacy is not being compromised, then that's a potential issue. Also, compliance, control, audit systems, making sure that that's in place so that we're not introducing more risks with the new functionality. As Anita said before, wrapping this all up in a comprehensive trust framework with different levels of assurance. Those levels of assurance are also interoperable, right? Because those are common standards. Different line parties, different service providers have agreed that if these criteria are met by an ID system or by another trust service, then that will be acceptable to a certain level of assurance. So that will give them a certain level of trust. And there has to be agreement on what those requirements are in order for that trust to be there, beyond your institution or your enterprise or your sector. So these non-technology elements are really critically important. The next slide, I won't belabor the point, but and especially since Pramod just spoke, I definitely won't belabor the India stack model. His diagrams are a little bit more updated than this one. But it's just to show that this sort of stack thinking and thinking about digital public infrastructure on a whole of government and whole of economy level, we're seeing more and more of it from countries. India has been a leader in this space. Singapore has been a leader, but other countries are starting to think about the interoperability not only across sectors but between different layers of their sort of national technology stack. And we expect more of this kind of thinking moving forward. And these things have been critical for scale up. I forgot to mention it before, but we're also doing at the World Bank, we're working with the government of Ukraine on a case study, because they've also got a sort of digital government stack that's been in place for the past decade. It's been developed for quite some time now. And we've probably all heard of the DIA app that allows, kind of unifies all sorts of public services together and allows all sorts of crisis response and resilience measures to be implemented. But what's less well understood is the data sharing platforms, the identity systems, and the other aspects of the whole of government interoperability that had to be in place in order to get that app to work. The DIA app that we've all seen is a front end as much as anything else, but it's as we all know here, it's what's under the hood that really enables that sort of digital transformation. My last slide, I just want to speak briefly about the global momentum we're seeing around DPI, but also, you know, the interoperability and thinking about technology is something that needs to be coordinated and not done isolated in silos. And so on the left, we've got Bill Gates speaking, but it was actually a whole meeting at the UN General Assembly that focused on DPI in the context of rapid scale up of public services, in the context of fragility, and in the context of climate change and climate resilience, and in the general insecurity in a lot of countries today, like I was speaking about with Ukraine. They've got the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which has support from different national governments, from different aid agencies, from different UN agencies, looking at building the building blocks of a digital public infrastructure, and establishing the open standards and open source solutions that the countries can draw on. GovStack is a similar initiative that looks more at the standards and less at the technology itself. That also has the support of a number of international actors and foundations and groups. And then, as I mentioned before, G20, and I could also mention the G7 in Japan and the D20 at India, these meetings, digital public infrastructure has been at the front line of the agenda. And we've seen governments at the highest level discussing this topic and how to support it. And then last but not least, the World Bank at the Digital Development Global Practice, and also the ID4D group and the G2PX initiative, and the various and also all of our lending operations in different countries are also supporting this full-throatedly. So I'm very excited to be here and be able to take part in this event and share a couple of thoughts with you about how interoperability for social protection and beyond fits into the broader development agenda. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for those insights. Now I invite Conrad Daly from the World Bank, and he's coming from the view from a social protection vertical, which is setting up ID systems in 6 countries in West Africa, because ID system is so central for the delivery of social protection. Over to you, Conrad.
Anita, thanks all. Could I have the slides put up, please?
You can share your screen because we didn't get your slides. You can share your slides.
Great. Can you see that okay?
That's okay. I mean, it could have been better, but I think it's okay. We can see it's coming in a very small window. It's not using the whole screen.
Let me try something else.
At the bottom, you have it at 50-something%.
How does it look now?
Can you email it also parallelly? Probably we can project it.
Thought I'd sent it. Let me try again. There you go. Oh.
Conrad, are you planning to send the email it, or It's not
I
working.
sent it. Did it not come? I sent it to you now. All right, well, I'm not quite sure what you can see. So let me start with this. They'll be available, I suppose, otherwise, will they not?
Yeah,
or is
we
it
will
only
share the
through the talk?
presentation. No, we will share the presentations with everybody on our website.
Okay, great. So the first slide here, I think you can see it. What you can see is the overall WURI map, and WURI is an initiative. So it's been nice to hear come after Chris. This is an initiative, one of the operations. It's a regional project. It has 6 countries to it, as you said, Anita. And the overall idea is to provide access to services through these unique identifiers by providing a unique identifier to all persons in the territories of these countries. The aim is 100 million individuals and we have it in 2 phases. First, Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire with the ECOWAS Commission, and then again with Burkina Faso, Benin, Niger, and Togo coming in the second phase. Overall financing for the project is $395.1 million. The idea is to build real.
Screen, but that nothing is visible now.
Nothing is visible. All right.
Listen, there is a World Bank screen, but no PPT.
Always helpful.
I can let you come in later if you want and ask Joseph to share his views first in case it's.
How's this? Is this working now?
Yes.
Great. Twice as efficient. So moving on from the slide that I was just showing you, which is tier of the regional project. It focuses in on, amongst other things, regional integration and inclusion. So building off of notions of free movement, economic integration, cross-country access to services, of which we've heard a few examples of how that might be done, and to do so with open, commonly shared standards, just as Pramod said, you need to have interoperability to be well defined. This is at the core of the project. And the idea is to produce a model that would be usable in other regions. The Africa Union, the WIMU initiative has also been interested in leveraging this project. And this is down here in the bottom left, a photo taken from our regional workshop that was held last May in Lagos, in Lomé, excuse me, Togo. So the idea is, the problem statement we have is we have access to basic human development programs in West Africa is particularly low. It's burdensome and difficult, largely due to identification barriers, and technological developments have helped, but have caused additional risks and challenges. So we're looking at how to deliver social services in a way that eases access, but does so without excluding people. So here's some further details. Since I've already lost some time, I'll leave this for you to look at later. Here's just one quick case study we saw and how it was done in Togo for social protection payments before COVID. And here we have the case of Amina, where she, like so many others, queues, money and verification is done through a mobile phone and through USSD code to complete the payment processing. And then she leaves, but she has her little livret here in the middle photo with her thumbprint and her signature, and that's the basis for the identification process. Obviously, that creates certain risks. And as we heard from one of the earlier presenters, particularly when it comes to carrying money and moving on a cross-border sense. So this project looks at cross-border authentication into, as you heard, we've been discussing, Anita laid out it in the abstract. You get a unique identifier from one country. You want to it to be used to authenticate and access services in another country. We want to build these trust services and trust networks between countries with their respective foundational unique identification systems in order for these credentials to be mutually recognized and hence to have interoperability. The project will be identifying services that can and should accept this identifier. It'll build off a legal regime in each country, but we're also developing a governance framework amongst all of the participating countries, as well as with the support of the ECOWAS Commission. Minimum standards need to be agreed upon at the regional level to allow interoperability and other processes. Technical integration for cross-border authentication uses federation. And then we have a peer review and or monitoring mechanisms to consider. Here's just a quick mock-up of what Benin is. Now they're farther along, but in this process, so they've moved beyond this mock-up. But here's what some of the aspects that were considered by the 6 countries for their consideration and determined that they would have as minimum criteria for their credential. Now, this is a physical laminated piece of paper that they would have, but it will equally work on smartphones or smart feature phones. And in the back end, as Pramod said, you don't necessarily need to physically have these aspects. This is just another aspect that we are giving out because people like things and something tangible to hold on to. But the key thing to hold on to here is that you see there's very minimal data that is expressed and shown on the credential itself. And then to give you a quick example, this is the Togo's Novici program, how it was building dynamic social registries through the use of universal IDs, EIDs. This image is quite interesting because it juxtaposes what Anita showed with us earlier. If you look at the bottom half, where you see the various steps of the administrative processes from outreach all the way through to management, there's limited moments where the individual need comes in. Novici was launched during the pandemic. It relied on doing the registration and connectivity remotely and on a base ID, which now they're expanding. Part of it will be built upon the WURI program and the unique identifier there. But you have very limited interaction, in person-to-person interaction. So it makes the entire process much easier, much more rapid. And in the case of COVID, in the case of the pandemic itself, it was a much more expedited system, which didn't rely on requiring people to meet and have to go through a series of registration processes. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Conrad. Thank you so much for sharing the WURI story. Now I'll invite Dr. Joseph Hattick, Executive Chairman of ID for Africa, to share his perspective from the African continent.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. And good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me actually to this very, very interesting session. Trust me, I won't show any PowerPoint, so I'm just going to speak off the cuff. I'd like to start with some few words about the status of identity system development in Africa and its relationship to social protection, or SP. The focus of the last decade has been in Africa on reinforcing the supply side of identity. So we've seen most of the efforts that have gone into making, boosting the enrollments, making them more accessible to people through several means, more registration centers. That was a huge investment. For example, Nigeria put up 16,000 registration centers using mobile technology to allow onboarding of people, more mass campaigns. We've seen Malawi, we've seen the Gambia, we've seen many places, Tanzania, that really pushed for mass campaigns. Building and cleaning and harmonizing identity databases and making them the foundation for national population registers have really occupied much of the last decade. While these efforts have increased the size of the national population registers, NPRs, it has become clear that boosting supply side is not enough to get NPRs to total coverage of the population. In fact, several major ID programs are now facing saturation or slowdown in enrollment update. No matter how much investment they make, they can't seem to get that last group of people that's very resistant. So the identity authorities have come to appreciate that they need to turn their attention to promoting the demand side for identity and not just the supply. And so thus far, however, by and large, they have tried policies that force or impose demand. So these are policies that make proof of national identity or proof of national identity number mandatory for certain rights and privileges. These included SIM number being linked to national identity. You can't have a SIM without having a NIN, national ID number, requiring digital identity number for KYC or for financial transactions, requiring it for derived credentials like passports and driver's licenses. So such policies, while impactful, they eventually reach saturation as well. And so basically, we are now looking at a situation where do we go from here? The reason that they reach saturation is that these services have limited ability to attract the most excluded segment of the population that remains outside the NPRs, namely the poor, those in rural areas, those in the informal sector, and the marginalized and the minorities. So you find yourself basically always putting programs that include the already included. So, but something new is happening now in the continent, and there is a definite universal recognition on the part of the identity authorities. The identity authorities have become more open to exploring other policies or incentives or to participating in partnerships that can increase demand for their ID systems by motivating and enticing instead of forcing. So among those policies, we've seen two broad stroke initiatives or policy umbrellas. Universal health coverage, that has shown tremendous appetite, tremendous promise to mobilize the population to enroll if the offer is credible. We saw it in the Gambia end of 2022. We're now seeing it in Morocco, which is leading to the development of the National Population Register. But the second is basically a whole umbrella of social protection programs, including direct monetary transfers. So these two applications are now high up in their potential to impact ID systems uptake right after KYC. KYC continues to be the #1 driver of ID systems in Africa, but social protection and universal health are not too far behind. So for the first time, we are starting to see identity authentication, identity authorities acknowledging SP as a potential driver for their ID systems, and they are more open than ever to supporting and to partnering and to supporting the identification needs of SP programs. We think there are tremendous synergies between ID and SP. We think ID needs SP to complete its NPRs, and SP needs ID for benefit delivery and management. What you are doing with the CDI initiative is really important because the path to realizing these synergies and the interoperability is uncharted. And theoretically, we understand it, we see it, and it's wonderful to see it, but it's uncharted on the ground. And so hence requires guidance and best practices, which is what we're hoping that this initiative could provide. I want to briefly explain the challenges ahead for that interoperability and integration in the real world context in Africa. And so to understand these challenges, we need to first quickly understand how SP and ID interact or don't interact today in practice. I claim that foundational ID systems in Africa suffer from structural weaknesses that render them less attractive or less fit for SP programs today. I can point to 4 issues that contribute to this weakness. My comments, of course, are limited to Africa. First, foundational identity systems have not achieved total coverage of the population, and the gaps are very pronounced within precisely the populations that need SP programs most. So SP authorities are not necessarily super motivated to embrace foundational systems and to rush and do these partnerships, since they do not cover the people they need covered most. Second, a related point is that foundational identity systems have been traditionally focused on adults and hence do not constitute population registers with children. That's slowly changing, but it's still the dominant picture. As you may know, identification systems are challenged when it comes to infant and children, procedurally, legally, and technologically. So until this issue is resolved and policies to bring in the children are in place, the value of foundational ID systems to SP, while it's there, will remain not fully realizable. Number three, I think ultimately, as you have been talking about, SP needs social registers, not population registers. While social registers are built sort of with interoperability and interaction or built on population registers or seeded with unique foundational identifiers, the gap between them is big. The gap between an SP and an NPR is big. And most investments in SP by social protection authorities goes into the MIS, goes into the information system, beneficiary management system, and less so investment into sort of linking it with ID. In fact, some programs ideally need household registers, not individual registers, which is something more complex than NPRs. And we've tried to really build the framework for how you build dynamic household registers. And so that's one barrier. We're seeing that in Morocco right now, where they're building the National Population Register as a social register first. And so motivating people to come in and try to group them to households. And they're finding that, yes, identity does help, but there are much more and bigger challenges than just simply saying, well, interoperate with identity. That's just a small element of it. Now, number four, under the current state of development of national ID systems, more SP authorities and programs have opted to deploy their own functional ID for a simplified identification of the beneficiaries. They tend to be ad hoc and are built without sustainability or universality in mind. Different programs within the social sector may even use different identifiers. The total number of beneficiaries have tended to be somewhat small. We're not talking about entire populations. And often the functional ID deploys technologies that are not interoperable, not standards-based, and potentially vendor-locked. There's no emphasis on quality of enrollment or onboarding, things like that. So this is a danger, and that's why the interoperability, if you can help social protection get there and avoid this development of functional IDs, we may end up making a huge contribution. So let me close by talking about the way forward. So sort of what some ideas about the way forward. We understand the situation. It hasn't been rosy. SP and ID haven't been really working together in Africa, but that's the continent that needs it most. So what is the way forward? Of course, this is a bigger conversation, but I want to briefly speak without getting into the national politics of social protection, which dominates the African landscape whenever we talk about the subject. I think we need to push for what I call a twinning between SP and ID. So what does this twinning look like? The twinning should be built on, at the very least, on 5 minimum essential pillars. The first one, we see SP authorities need to be equipped and certified by identity authorities to act as registrars for national identity. SP authorities have excellent points of contact with the population that can be leveraged for enrolling those potential beneficiaries who are not already enrolled in the National Population Register. So when somebody shows up and says, I don't have it, you don't turn them away and say, go away and go enroll there. You just do it on the spot. This is a win-win. It allows the identity authorities to expand their enrollment centers without having to need to build additional infrastructure or personnel. So we need to focus on that. SP authorities must become registrars. And now standards-based enrollment software could be MOSIP and open standards need to be operated by SP agents. They need to be trained, they need to have access to it, and needs to be there. To me, that's one of the most important steps. The second is to allow SP to have a KYC channel with a SLAs, service level agreements that are adequate for their needs. So you need to be at the National Population Register, we have to put the right SLAs in place so that a KYC channel for SP could be in operation. To me, SP KYC is a one-time interaction for each beneficiary at the time of onboarding the beneficiary and verifying their official identity. Preferably, of course, this could be done online so that they don't have to show any tokens or documents, which is what happens today. Now, SP, and here I have a divergence from what was discussed in the theoretical context. I believe SP should maintain its own identity authentication engines for SP transactions and not rely on the centralized identity authority each time a beneficiary needs to be authenticated and their identity needs to be authenticated at the time of service. I'm very nervous about centralized authentication engines across all segments. And this is very important for privacy, scalability, and for moving away from this centralization. Centralization worked very well in India, but even India is moving away from centralization. So we better think about SP in the context of how do we move into a sectoral identity authentication without having to send every transaction. 1.5 billion is going to Aadhaar every month. So we need decentralized applications, decentralized transactions. So identity verification also should be very convenient, quick, and should use proportional measures compatible with transaction risks. And this is not necessarily the same as KYC authentication that the identity authorities are trying to maintain with a certain centralized rigor and architecture. So it could be non-foundational in the sense that we could give somebody a two-factor authentication. They could use their iris, they could use a single finger, they could use a PIN, they could use a one-time password. And all of those should be innovations that the private sector should be contributing to and allowing these social protection authorities to embrace. I'm very excited about the possibility of social protection using decentralized verifiable credentials. In fact, I will talk very quickly, tell you when you can hear that. There are some applications where the people receive verifiable credentials that are decentralized, and then from then on, they can verify themselves without having to resort to a centralized application. Obviously, interoperability with the data formats is very, very important, and so we can't give that up. Number 4, I think we should encourage the reflection on the development of household and social registers. Social protection identification needs does not end with interoperating with the identity authority to get a single number and authenticated. We need to encourage the development of a domain of research and platforms, which allows the social protection authorities to build household registers. And we need tools like DPGs to support their development. The grouping of individuals into dynamic household units and the business rules for allocating their entitlement is somewhat involved. And it's not standardized as an exercise, so it would be wonderful if we can see an initiative, a DPG that works on that. We need to avoid getting us into homegrown MIS that does that. And in many cases where I've been involved, I've seen the lock-in happening as soon as you launch this program, because the person who did it is the only one who's able to make the modifications. Number 5, and that's very important, and it has to do with identity data update. That challenges the relationship between the registers, even if they're interoperable, unless you have a mechanism for data sharing synchronization that is compatible with the preferences of the people. So a social protection beneficiary does not necessarily go to the identity authority to update their status. They may go to the social protection people because they're interacting with them much more. How do we end up updating this information. It could be an individual, a couple, somebody who got widowed because they lost their partner. We need to understand how that data can be moved. Most identity programs are challenged with the update of the data and the information. Schemes like X-Road could be very effective here, but it's not the technology. It is the business practices and how we can bring them together. Okay, let me just quickly close by repeating that the integration of ID and SP systems is exceedingly important and a very rich topic, and I commend you for stimulating the discussion around it. In fact, at ID for Africa, we're planning several in-depth sessions this year to complement what you are doing and cover the topic to a broader audience. First, on March 22nd, we have a live cast dedicated to digital identity in the service of social protection. We shared how innovation in digital ID are supporting financial inclusion and inclusive public service delivery in Sierra Leone, and are enabling some high-impact humanitarian social protection programs from the World Food Programme and Red Cross around the world, and national monetary transfer programs in several countries in Africa. So those are very, very concrete examples. In addition, at the ID for Africa Augmented General Meeting in Nairobi in May, we have a major plenary session on the afternoon of day one that will focus on enabling social protection use cases, which are high impact. In fact, CDI's Anita Mittal will be speaking in that session. She will give a keynote presentation. So please keep an eye for the announcements for the SP-related livecast or the AGM sessions. And we look forward to continuing our collaborations with CDI and to seeing many of you next on March 22nd and hopefully at the AGM. Thank you, Anita, for the invite, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for that rich database of information, the priority use cases that will work in Africa, the challenges, and also the solutions, how we should address them. And we look forward to collaboration with you, because the solutions or the standards we are producing definitely have to meet the needs of Africa. So thank you so much. With this, now I invite our partner solution provider, MOSIP, with which we have been able to do all these demos, and thanks to them for all their support in completing this. So over to you, Sasi, for your
Thanks, Anita.
presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just trying to share my screen. Give me a minute. Okay, I hope everybody is able to see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Jump on. So I think you very well done demo, Anita. It showcased the powerfulness that ID could potentially bring in. So quite a lot of discussions on ID and ID's use case. So I'm trying to highlight some of the solutions as an open source DPI that we provide, wherein the countries could adapt. So one is fundamentally the issuance model. So you issue once or you update regularly. Is how the identity issuance and the verification model works. So you saw a lot of online and way of verifying the user's credentials with either using the QR code, OTP, biometrics. So that's all provided by the MOSIP platform at its core of it. So it's a full-fledged issuance platform for a national ID kind of a project. Then once you cross over the online way of working, then you get to the other side of the story, where a credential gets issued at the end of any of the registrations. And once the registration is complete and a credential is issued, can the end user use this credential, whether it is in a paper copy, whether it is in a particular mobile wallet, whether it is in a SIM card as a cryptographic key. So there are like tons of ways to imagine credentials in there. And Inji is a solution which kind of works all of these things together. Today it concentrates predominantly on mobile and USSD, but it's going to combine all this end deliverable problems into an offline mode of authentication. So you don't wait for a central server to provide you with a go-ahead or a non-go-ahead. And this is going to be combined with multiple standards. We'll speak about the standards in the later slides, but that's the power that the INGI brings on. And then if you potentially have a wallet and your credential, how do you actually share this information? That's where the eSignet comes in. The eSignet is the OpenID Connect based protocol. So it combines the powerful OpenID Connect and the very specifically handpicked OAuth protocols to share your credential information in as much most privacy protected way to the relying party, and in turn providing consent and other things so that the relying party could interact with the other resources to access it. So it enables us with powerful interoperable use cases completely railed over OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. The final piece of the solution is little outside of identity, but comes directly into the social protection scheme, is the OpenG2P platform. So it has a powerful way of collecting social protection necessities where you can self-register or you bring in an agent and register people into the social protection program. And then you could query dynamically of various information, whether they are eligible for a program or not, and then apply them with direct benefit transfers, wherein the money could be directly credited to their bank account. So all this is an end-to-end solution that today MOSEP and IIITP brings on the table. Quickly into what we have been up to in the last 4 years. It's almost 4 years from the time we started our first writing our first piece of code. Today, MOSEP is adopted across 11 countries. We have rolled it out, more than 80 million registrations in place. We are speaking with talks in multiple countries about how do you enable them into social protection and how do you actually scale up the system to get the social protection stuffs working in a necessity way, because there's a different way of thinking social protections, because there are culturally countries think it very, very different. While the end goal could remain the same, the same model does not fit in every single place. There is changes in the way the approaches are, and those are being worked out as we speak. Also, we bring in, as an open source contributors, we don't actually go and implement the solutions. We have 70+ odd partners with us working together and making MOSEP better, whether they provide us with standardized devices or with the specific modules in MOSEP. We will speak about some of those modules. They could overwrite it completely, and you could replace MOSEP's module with their modules, and it would simply work. And as much as possible, it's literally closer to well-defined API standards, closer to the plug-and-play kind of a model. And we do run compliance for a lot of these applications and services that our partners offer, so that we are sure that their product and their protocols comply with our standards. Quickly, moving on to the integration models. MOSEP has a wide variety of integration models, has at least a variety of protocols that we rely on. There is no one protocol that fits in into all scheme of things that we want to achieve. REST is definitely one of our common protocols that you would see, but it doesn't limit with there. We also picked up the PubSub mechanism for most of the eventing and credentialing and other purposes, so that events across the systems could be passed across. So if you have a system from where when an ID is issued, you want to actually populate a social benefit registry based on certain business logic and conditions, that's where the PubSub kind of eventing mechanism actually helps out. So that again is a W3C standard that has been in use for quite some time. We picked up, adapted here. There are quite a lot of others. Consent-based sharing, which is based on OpenID Connect and OAuth, is used here. We also rely quite a lot of things on the verifiable credentials and JSON-LD for our work. So at the end of any credentialing, what we issue out as a credential, whether it's get printed on a card or a paper or into digital systems, those are fundamentally a W3C compliant verifiable credentials today. There are a lot of interesting work within the credentialing that we have done to enable quite a lot of offline use cases, which we'll speak as we proceed. And once an ID is in progress, then there is also need for updates, regular intervention, childbirth and others to be taken care. And you also have the death registries and other thing to be maintained. So we have been in close partnership with Open CRVS and built a reference integration for it to tell how do you integrate your civil registry systems, which can calculate your birth, death, phone number change, local address changes to so many other things. How do they actually interoperate with the civil registry so that you don't need to all the time come back into the registration system? Rather, how do you interact with the civil registries and administrative offices to actually update your data? So that is, as a reference implementation, is done through Open CRVS. We're looking at more and more reference implementation in that side of the story. You also saw the integration of the OpenID Connect, which is the eSignet In the backend of eSignet, it's of open verifiable credentials being issued, and that is fundamentally is a protocol that we're speaking about using in OpenG2P. I think it's already integrated today. We're looking at GovStack, where we are pushing in the direction of how do we use the OpenID Connect and how do you actually construct all the credentialing and everything together. So it's a combination of OpenID Connect plus verifiable credentials into the standard to build in. So we are working with GovStack closely to do this as a full use case so that there's an end-to-end agreeable protocol that could be provided. We are working closely with Anita and team on DCI to see how do we actually show these reference implementations. And you saw one of those reference implementation in a beautiful way. Okay. Our authentication API, there is a direct integration. This is not an OpenID, but this is a protocol that we published out about 2 years before, has been used by a lot of healthcare companies. DCI2 is also one well-known open healthcare application that uses our auth API and could actually identify the people. Because one of the classic use case that DHIS2 was struggling with was deduplicating and repeatedly deduplicating people, and with the national ID kind of MOSIP system, you don't need to worry about reduplicating every time. An ID issuance will be good enough to prove quite a lot of assurance there. So your card, your QR code, your biometrics, every individual way you could prove it to it. So that's a reference implementation that's available. It's done through our contribution from CMU Africa. Scilabs. So it's a beautiful contribution to what we have been working on. The next is the credential story. As I said, our credential story is predominantly revolves around INGI, but INGI is not built as a one particular wallet. It's rather built with interoperable protocols in such a way that there are many of the protocol companies which today who are issuing mobile ID could actually hook onto our system and get the national ID into that. So it's no more specifically you need to use a MOSIP component. You could use any of our partner components and it will work seamlessly with that. So that's the power that it brings on as the standardization. If you wonder how long does it take to get the standards, some of these standards are pretty much out there. For example, the CBIF for biometrics to make it interoperable or interexchangeable, we did go through the CBIF and other formats. But when we started working on these things, we also realized there's quite a lot of places there are gaps, or in fact, there are huge gaps left over, which have to be filled in a way that is essential. And you would see some of our work with the OpenID Connect team for the BLE. So we are trying to get in a BLE mode of offline sharing of credentials from one mobile phone to another mobile phone, so that between the person who has this verifiable credentials on a phone could share it locally in a local environment. It includes over BLE, it all obviously includes our QR code and other things together. So that becomes one interoperable way where you can do it without a central server. Relies on verifiable credentials, but for the trust and other factors, we are relying on some more unique way of trusting the relaying party as well as trusting the user. Similar way in interacting with the biometric devices. So the biometric device integration is a huge use case, whether it comes with registration or updates or authentication, where people come in just with a number and their fingerprint. You need a standardized way to interoperate with general purpose biometric devices. Today, the phones and other things comes with personal biometrics, wherein your personal biometric information is put into the phone and you could authenticate. That works in certain use cases, but not in other use cases. So there are use cases around the world where people would come in just with their number and we want to give their biometrics and authenticate in order to prove themselves. Those are valid use cases that we want to address. Similarly with registrations, if you want to make the registrations as fast as possible and as interoperable so that you're not vendor locked in your entire work and updates and everything that goes on, we need an interface. So we are working with IEEE to publish an international standards around it. It's P3167. Any of the people who are interested in, please reach out to us. You could be a member there and we could participate to make things better out there. Obviously, being in the open source domain, we work with quite a lot of standard bodies across the globe. Either we propose standards or we influence the standards in the direction we think could comprehend for a country scale identity systems. And quite our work is listed down here with several of the forums that we work with at our regular times. There are quite a lot of standards, as I said, is needed to be published more. And obviously, these are in need, and we are trying to gear up to get there. We are not yet there. And that is where the verifiable consent comes in. How do you verify a consent? How do you know a person gave a consent to share this data, both in the offline mode as well as in the online mode, right? To an online mode, you're kind of little okay, but when it comes to an offline mode, how do you verify this consent? Does he really share the data? Was it shared for this specific purpose? Was it used for this specific purpose? There's quite a lot of questions to be answered in order to digitally protect this ecosystem that's trying to use this digital identity. Digital identity in wallets, I think we have made a considerable progress there. Biometric templates, we wanted to move and look at beyond face and iris and fingerprint. We want to look at voice as a way to actually make it interoperable. So how do you actually get in there? How do you actually do it? How do you construct these templates in a way that it's open enough for everything to work through? There are some works that ISO has done. We're trying to adopt and trying to see the missing gaps and see how we can work with them together. There are a lot of work that needs on the trust framework. So we're trying to work on the trust framework to get to an extent where it can literally do cross-border authentication very safely and very protected. Okay, so there's quite a lot of work and standards that we're working on today. A lot of help is needed in certain places where people who know these fundamental stuff and who are also working bodies could work collaboratively to make this better. Quickly, thank you for the time and thanks for it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ashi. I think we are just nearing the end of the session. So, and I've seen that lots of the questions that were, thanks, Ashi, for the presentation. I'll have to basically now invite you for the closing. We do have 5 minutes for the closing. In between, I think Jome's question is the only one which was not answered. Rest I see have been answered. Jome, do you want to quickly come for a minute? And then I'll project the slides in the meantime.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is Jérôme Dubois. I'm work lead at GovStack on the identity building block. I'm also advisor for the Togo Foundational ID. And in fact, we just a comment is that we see a lot of initiative around these DPIs. What is good is that we see they are using the same concept, the same approach, and we need to make sure that there are no duplicates. So for that, we have collaboration, we have discussion. There are some common stakeholders. For example, MOSIP is present in various initiatives, and I think it will be good to have some, let's say, to see how we could create synergies and understand the roles of everybody. I see, for example, G2P Connect initiative is an initiative which is starting to from DPG and going to create a DPI, whereas on GovStack, we start from the DPI and try to identify the right DPG. And as it was mentioned by, I think it was Pramod maybe, the GovStack is something about interoperability, about specification, because it's onboarding ITU, which is a standardization body. Whereas, for example, G2P Connect is coming from the experience of DPG, or DCI is coming also for the field experience, all the sessions that you are doing. So just I see that it's working. It will be good that we have a clear understanding of the roles of this initiative working together. And just to jump also on what Joseph said, there is a need for more mobility, for more inclusion, because we are talking about technology. But as it was said by Joseph, we are not covering everybody, and the one we cover are not the one we want to cover with social protection. So we need to step back with technology and maybe think about how we can onboard these people. So that's just comments. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jame. Now I invite Yoon from the World Bank to close the session on behalf of DCI. Can you see the screen?
Yes, Anita, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this session. It was wonderful to see so many various discussions around the world. My name is Yoon Cho, Senior Economist from the World Bank. I'm a task team leader in the Philippines World Bank project, Social Protection Project. We call it Beneficiary First Social Protection Project. FIRST stands for Fast, Innovative, and Responsive Service Transformation. The reason that we named the project as Beneficiary First, it was really motivated by Philippines COVID-19 response. At that time, government introduced very large-scale social protection program to cover up to 80% of the entire population. But despite the ambition, what happened was that process was manual, paper-based, and people had to line up to get cash transfer in physical forms. That huge implementation challenges really motivated the beneficiary first social protection projects, and the core of the project design is really integration of ID into social protection delivery. So based on some of the experience in the Philippines, so many things that we discussed during this session resonate so much. And thinking about myself and thinking about the practitioners, having a conversation with social protection agency or counterparts in incorporating ID into social protection delivery, I'd like to suggest my 4 takeaways, what we need to deliver in terms of the messages. First one is really what ID can do for social protection. I think earlier presenters mentioned some of the kind of different words between SP and ID, and then we need to bring them all together. So delivering the messages, how ID can help social protection delivery in an efficient manner and effective manner for inclusion, that's going to be fundamentally important, not only for authentication and KYC, but the interoperability, bringing all different databases and information for social protection delivery, that's going to be very important. That's the first message, what ID can do for social protection. But not only the theoretical aspect of benefits of ID, how can that happen? How ID can bring these benefits to social protection? So we discussed about this public infrastructure and standardized format and data sharing platforms and API and federation system. All this technicality is important. And what about cybersecurity and privacy? What about data sharing, conducive environments, including legal and institutional and regulatory mechanisms? So these are some of the things and food for thoughts that we can collectively think about and provide solutions. And in addition to theoretical benefit and practical way to go, and third one is really about what we are talking about is not about technology, not about systems, not about program. It's really about beneficiary and beneficiary first approach. It was really interesting to hear some of the perspective when we are talking about this integration, interoperability. A lot of people are talking about internet connectivity, or what about technology, what about phone, mobile phone penetration. But it is really encouraging to see some of the examples like in India, whether you have phone or not, whether it is feature phone or not, whether you have internet connectivity or not, it is really able to serve the informal sector and marginalized population. It is really about inclusion. So that message has to really come out strongly when we are delivering these messages. Finally, it goes beyond social protection. It can be a strong catalyst to mobilize private sector as well to join this force and standardize interoperability to really boost the ecosystem of digital infrastructure and service delivery to really serve the population that we are talking about. So with these 4 takeaways, I really commend all the organizers and participants for this active interactions and brilliant presentation, and we are looking forward to see many more of this awareness increasing and knowledge sharing discussions and inspiration in other events as well. So if you look at the next slides, the DCI has done a great job in increasing the awareness in this agenda. We talked about social protection, MIS, interoperable with CRVS, payment, and national ID. So today's session was really about national ID, but we had payments discussions before. And then like in the Philippines, social protection MIS being interoperable with social registry or beneficiary database is going to be fundamentally important for social protection delivery. And other interoperable systems, including linking social protection with a disability database or farmers registry, these are also important agenda we are currently discussing in the Philippines and many other parts of the world. And it's very interesting and informative to see some of these events organized by DCI. So let me conclude this session and close this session by advertising some of the DCI's initiatives, and you can check out the many activities and interesting and informative materials through these different mechanisms. And I will also show that there is a new website that DCI is putting up. And through that website, you can see much more information and engaged in this inspiring discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yoon, for wrapping it up and by listing all the takeaways and the important points and connecting them with the Philippines. That was super relevant for this audience. Thank you, everyone, for staying back. We are just a few minutes over time, but thank you all for your continued interest. We look forward to you joining our dialogue series, which is happening on Thursday, and our workshops that will be happening in due course of time over the next few months. Thank you to all the speakers and the experts who presented and shared their perspective from World Bank, ID for Africa, from India, Pramod, as well as from the MOSIP team. Thank you all so much. Look forward to you joining our next sessions. With this, we end this workshop today.
Thank you so much. Great job.